A first-class ticket should mean comfort, dignity, respect, but for the Morgan family, it became the doorway to humiliation. At the boarding gate of Pacifica Airways Flight 709, Dr. Celeste Morgan, a world-renowned heart surgeon, stood with her husband Anthony and their 12-year-old daughter Lila, ready to begin a journey to Zurich. Instead, they were met with suspicion, denial, and the sting of prejudice from a flight attendant who saw them not as premium passengers, but as intruders. The gate was closing. Their dream trip hung by a thread, and in those tense moments, one question lingered. How far would injustice go before someone stopped it? What no one knew was that the man with ultimate authority over the entire aircraft, the captain himself, was about to emerge. With 6 unforgettable words, he would flip the entire narrative, exposing a hidden bond that tied his life to theirs forever. But what did he owe them? And how could one act of courage ignite a firestorm that would ripple through boardrooms, newsrooms, and the hearts of millions? Stay with us as we unravel this extraordinary story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The low hum of engines thrummed through the belly of Pacifica Airways Flight 709 as first-class passengers filed into their seats, outside the windows. The late afternoon light over Los Angeles International Airport poured gold across the tarmac, shimmering on the sleek curve of the aircraft's wings. Inside the cabin, attendants offered practice smiles, guiding travelers into their spacious pods, arranging champagne flutes, and stowing designer carry-ons in overhead compartments. It was a ritual of calm efficiency, meant to soothe those who had paid for comfort. For Dr. Celeste Morgan, it should have been a moment of quiet triumph. She adjusted the strap of her leather satchel and glanced at her husband Anthony, who was settling their daughter Lila into her seat. The 3 of them had waited for this trip with a mixture of anticipation and pride. Zurich was not just another destination. It was the stage where Celeste had been invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Congress of Pediatric Cardiology, a recognition of years of research, nights spent hunched over case studies, and countless hours inside the operating room. The invitation was more than professional acclaim. It was validation that her work, her voice, and her presence mattered on a global stage. And yet, beneath her calm smile, she felt the faint pulse of anxiety. Every achievement she earned seemed to carry the unspoken weight of representing more than herself, representing every child whose life she had touched, every young student who looked at her and dared to imagine a place in medicine, and every person of color who knew too well how quickly dignity could be stripped in spaces of privilege. Anthony reached over and touched her hand, a quiet gesture of reassurance. He knew that look in her eyes, the balance between pride and unease. His role had always been that of the steady builder. As an architect, he measured life in lines and foundations, creating order from chaos. With Celeste, he had built not just a life, but a sanctuary. And with Lila, their 12-year-old, he had built a reason to keep pushing forward no matter how strong the headwinds. Lila pressed her forehead to the oval window, her dark curls falling forward as she peered out at the dance of ground vehicles on the tarmac. She clutched her sketchbook against her knees. Already, pages were filled with pencil drawings of the Alps, of lakes glinting under imagined sunlight, of fountains leaping into the sky. To her, Zurich meant more than a conference. It meant stories, chocolate, and the thrill of walking streets she had only seen in picture books. For days she had told anyone who would listen, We're flying first class." Her voice had carried that innocent awe, as if the words themselves were magic. Celeste had smiled each time, though she sometimes worried about what it meant to let her daughter taste luxury so young. Still, Anthony had insisted. "You've earned this," he had said. "This isn't just another trip. You're not just attending, you're leading. We're going to cross that ocean in style, together." She had not argued. For once, it felt right to embrace the reward. The cabin around them was a study in quiet privilege. A businessman murmured into his phone, covering his mouth as if guarding secrets. A woman in pearls arranged her shawl just so, tapping her fingers impatiently against her champagne glass. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man wrestled with his overhead bag, muttering under his breath. The scent of leather seats mixed with chilled air and faint notes of citrus from the welcome drinks. Everything was curated, calculated to whisper, "You belong here. You've arrived." And yet, as Celeste settled into her seat, she couldn't shake the memory of other spaces where belonging had been questioned. A hotel lobby in Boston where a clerk had insisted on double-checking her ID. A hospital boardroom where she had been mistaken for an assistant rather than the lead surgeon. Small moments, sharp as glass splinters. They never stopped cutting, even when the wounds seemed healed. Lila broke her reverie, tugging at her sleeve. "Mom, when we get there, can we go see the big fountain first, the one that shoots water? Like, taller than a building." Her eyes shone with such earnest hope that Celeste's heart softened. Yes, she promised. The fountain first, then chocolate. Lila grinned, scribbling a tiny fountain in her sketchbook, complete with jets of water spraying into the sky. Anthony leaned back in his seat, finally allowing himself to exhale. He watched the other passengers, many of whom glanced briefly at his family before turning away. Some looks carried curiosity, others indifference, and a few seemed to linger with an edge of surprise, as though their presence in the first-class cabin required explanation. Anthony felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came whenever he sensed unspoken judgment. He squeezed Celeste's hand under the armrest, both to steady her and himself. The intercom crackled softly overhead. "Welcome aboard Pacifica Airways Flight 709 to Zurich," the purser's voice intoned. "Please take your seats as we prepare for departure. We will be closing the boarding door shortly." Around them, flight attendants moved briskly, checking seat belts, offering last-minute refreshments, adjusting pillows. Their professionalism created the illusion of harmony, a well-oiled ballet. Celeste let herself breathe in the moment, convincing herself that nothing would shatter the fragile peace. But peace, she had learned, was rarely permanent. Sometimes it cracked not with thunder, but with the quietest of sounds, a clipped tone, a lingering stare, a single word spoken as if it carried more weight than it should. She sensed it now, the faint vibration of unease, like a warning tremor before the quake. She brushed it away, choosing instead to focus on Lila's laughter and Anthony's steady presence. The engines began to roar, their vibrations rattling through the floor. Lila pressed her hands to the window, eyes wide with wonder. Celeste smiled, holding that image close, a daughter untouched, still wrapped in innocence, if only it could last. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the boarding door clicked shut with a heavy finality. A subtle shift passed through the aircraft, that moment when anticipation settles into inevitability. The passengers in first class leaned back, sinking into their wide leather seats, adjusting blankets, scrolling through phones. For most, the journey had already begun in comfort. For the Morgans, however, the true journey had yet to reveal its turbulence. A flight attendant approached from the galley, balancing a tray of welcome beverages. Her uniform was crisp, every fold pressed, her hair pulled tight into a bun that seemed to strain against her temples. She wore the practiced smile of someone who had delivered the same greeting 1,000 times. But there was no warmth in her eyes. Her name badge read Samantha Blake, champagne, orange juice, or sparkling water. She asked the row across from the Morgans, her voice even, though tinged with impatience. She served swiftly, efficient as a metronome, before turning to their row. The smile faltered, replaced by something tauter, almost wary. Her gaze lingered on Celeste's satchel, on Anthony's watch, on Lila's sketchbook spread open across her lap. It was not the quick appraisal of a professional ensuring safety, but the lingering evaluation of someone piecing together a story that did not align with expectation. The look was subtle, yet Celeste caught it immediately. Years in hospitals had trained her to read expressions like monitors, tiny signals of judgment, doubt, or dismissal. "We'll have champagne for us, orange juice for her," Anthony said calmly, gesturing toward Lila. His tone was polite, his smile steady. Samantha's eyes narrowed a fraction before she nodded and set down the drinks with a precision that bordered on brittle. The glasses clinked against the tray louder than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet cabin. "Your boarding passes, please," she added suddenly. Anthony blinked. "I'm sorry." "Your boarding passes," she repeated, "just to confirm seat assignments." Celeste tilted her head, confusion flickering across her face. They had already shown their passes twice, once at the gate, once at the entrance to the jet bridge. No one else in first class was being asked again. Around them, other passengers sipped their champagne or unfolded newspapers, unbothered. "Is there a problem?" Celeste asked, her voice measured, professional. She had learned long ago that tone was armor. Samantha offered a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. "No problem, ma'am, just a standard check." Anthony reached into his blazer pocket and produced the crisp boarding passes. Sliding them onto the tray, Samantha inspected them with deliberate slowness, her eyes flicking between the names and the screen of her handheld device. Her fingers tapped, each click echoing louder in Celeste's chest than the engines outside. Lila looked between her parents, her brow furrowed. "Why is she checking again?" she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but not quiet enough. Celeste smoothed her daughter's hair, murmuring reassurance. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just routine." She hoped the lie sounded convincing. Samantha finally returned the boarding passes, her smile now sharpened into something resembling courtesy. "Thank you. Enjoy your flight." She pivoted away, the tray balanced perfectly, her shoulders stiff, but the damage had been done. The subtle shift in atmosphere was undeniable, like the first drop of pressure before a storm. Celeste exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around her glass of champagne. She wanted to dismiss the moment as nothing, a simple formality, yet she felt the sting beneath it, the insinuation that their presence needed verification in a way others did not. The thought pressed into her chest, heavy and familiar. She glanced at Anthony, who was staring at the attendants retreating back, his jaw clenched. "She's just doing her job," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. Maybe it was random. Celeste didn't reply. Random never felt random when the pattern repeated itself across a lifetime. Minutes passed. The engines rumbled deeper, preparing for taxi. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and reassuring. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Richard Hayes. We'll be departing shortly for Zurich. Flight time is just under 11 hours. Weather looks favorable, with only minor turbulence expected along the way. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." His words were calm, professional. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of his voice soothe her frayed nerves. But when she opened them again, she caught Samantha's gaze from across the cabin. The attendant was standing near the galley, speaking softly to another crew member, her eyes darting back to the Morgans more than once. Celeste recognized that look too. It was not curiosity. It was suspicion dressed as procedure. Anthony leaned toward her. "Ignore it. Don't let it ruin this." She nodded, though her stomach tightened. She had built her career on composure, on the ability to remain steady under pressure, to focus on the beating heart in front of her, even as alarms screamed around her. But this was different. This was her family, her daughter, her dignity on trial without words. Lila tugged at her sleeve again. "Mom, why did she look at us like that?" Celeste forced a smile. She didn't mean anything by it, but Lila's eyes were sharp, unclouded by the filters adults wore. It felt like she didn't think we belonged here. The words landed like stones. Out of the mouths of children comes the truth. Adults try to soften. Celeste held her daughter's hand, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. "We do belong here," she said softly. "Never forget that." The engines surged, the plane beginning its slow crawl toward the runway. The cabin crew moved through their safety checks, their voices reciting well-worn instructions, seat backs upright, tray tables stowed, seat belts fastened. Samantha passed their row once more, her eyes grazing over them with that same shadow of doubt. She adjusted a pillow for the passenger behind them with exaggerated care, then returned to the galley. Celeste leaned back, her heart steady but heavy. She thought of the conference ahead, the speech she had prepared about breakthroughs in pediatric cardiac care. She thought of the young lives she had fought to save, of the parents who had clutched her hands in gratitude. In those moments, she was trusted with everything. Here, in this cabin, her competence, her very right to sit in her seat, was questioned with the flick of an attendant's eye. The wheels lifted from the ground, and Los Angeles shrank beneath them. Lila gasped with delight, pressing her face against the window, sketchbook forgotten in her lap. "We're flying," she whispered, eyes wide. Celeste smiled at her daughter's joy, but her thoughts lingered on the shadows gathering just rows away. A storm had been seeded, and she knew too well how quickly storms could break. The aircraft climbed steadily into the darkening sky, the city lights of Los Angeles scattering like jewels beneath the wings before fading into the distance. The cabin settled into a hushed rhythm. Passengers adjusting pillows, scrolling through tablets, and ordering their first glasses of wine. The hum of engines was steady, almost hypnotic. For many, this was the moment to relax. For the Morgans, however, the unease lingered, a shadow trailing them into the clouds. Celeste tried to focus on the glow of her seat's screen, scrolling through the film library, but her thoughts refused to settle. Samantha Blake's eyes, the way they had lingered, the unnecessary recheck of their passes, it pressed on her chest like a weight she could not shake. She reached for her glass of champagne but set it down untouched. Anthony noticed and gave her a gentle look, the one he reserved for moments when he could sense the storm inside her. He didn't speak, but his hand found hers beneath the armrest, fingers curling around hers with a promise of steadiness. Across the aisle, Lila had opened her sketchbook again, her pencil flying across the page as she tried to capture the wing slicing through the night sky. She hummed softly to herself, a tune Celeste recognized from the car rides they shared to school. That innocence was a balm, but also a reminder. Celeste wanted desperately to shield her daughter from moments like the one they had endured on the ground, the kind of subtle dismissal that could bruise even without words. The calm did not last. Samantha returned down the aisle, this time without a tray. Her steps were deliberate, her posture straight, her chin lifted with the authority of someone who believed she was defending a sacred order. She stopped at their row, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes fixed on Anthony. "Sir, I need to verify your tickets again," she said. Anthony blinked, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. "We already showed them to you." "Yes," Samantha replied, her smile polite but taut. "However, there appears to be an inconsistency in our system regarding these seats. I'll need to confirm that you are assigned to 2A, 2B, and 2C. Celeste's head lifted sharply. An inconsistency. What sort of inconsistency? Samantha shifted slightly, as though bracing for resistance. It happens sometimes with third-party bookings. Seat assignments can be flagged until they're properly validated. If you wouldn't mind, please step into the galley with me so we can clear this up. The words were professional in sound, but not in spirit. The undercurrent was unmistakable. You do not belong here. Celeste felt her pulse quicken, her composure tightening like a surgeon's knot. Anthony sat back, his jaw working, the vein at his temple beginning to pulse. "We booked directly through the airline," he said firmly. "Weeks ago, we checked in online, checked our bags, cleared security, passed the gate, boarded this plane, sat in these seats. There is no inconsistency." Samantha's smile thinned further. Her voice dropped low, but not low enough to escape the ears of nearby passengers. "Sir, I'm simply following procedure. If you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to escalate this matter." Around them, the air thickened with attention. A businessman leaned slightly forward in his pod, pretending to adjust his tablet but clearly listening. A woman across the aisle frowned, curiosity etched into her features. Even the flight attendant standing near the curtain of business class shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but saying nothing. Celeste felt the humiliation settle like ice in her veins. It wasn't just the request, it was the way Samantha's words branded them as suspicious, an interruption in the choreography of first class. She thought of every fight she had fought to earn her place in the world, and now, in front of her daughter, it was being questioned by someone wielding nothing more than a scanner and a smirk. Lila looked up, confusion clouding her wide eyes. "Mom, what's happening?" Why does she keep asking? Celeste's heart broke at the tremor in her daughter's voice. She reached over, brushing a curl from Lila's cheek. "It's fine, sweetheart. Just a mistake." But even as she said it, her words tasted like ash. Anthony stood slowly, his height and calm presence filling the narrow aisle. He held out his phone, the airline app glowing with their reservation. "Here, booked under my account. Seats 2A, 2B, and 2C, verified, checked in, on time. Do you want to see the confirmation number? Samantha glanced at the phone, then back at him, unmoved. "Our system is the final authority. Sir, not your app. I'll need you to step aside." Celeste rose too, her voice low but edged with steel. "You've made your point, but we are not moving from these seats. If you believe there is a legitimate issue, then bring your supervisor. Otherwise, this harassment ends here." The word hung in the air: harassment. It was a word that sliced through the thin veneer of professionalism Samantha clung to. Her cheeks flushed, her composure wavered, but then, as though doubling down on her authority, she straightened again. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. We don't want to cause a disturbance for other passengers." The irony nearly made Celeste laugh. A disturbance. As though they had created this spectacle by insisting on the dignity of remaining in the seats they had lawfully purchased. She caught Anthony's eye, saw the storm gathering behind his calm exterior. He wanted to push harder, to demand names and consequences. But she placed a hand lightly on his arm, signaling restraint. Outrage would only play into the narrative Samantha was crafting: the disruptive family, the problem to be managed. Instead, Celeste turned her gaze to the rows around them, locking eyes with the passengers who had been watching. Some quickly looked away. A few held her stare, sympathy flickering there, but none spoke. Silence was complicity, and yet she understood. People rarely risk their comfort to intervene. Samantha exhaled sharply, muttering something under her breath before pivoting back toward the galley, the moment she disappeared behind the curtain. A wave of whispers rippled through the cabin. A man across the aisle shook his head, his expression disapproving. The woman in pearls pursed her lips, clearly annoyed by the disruption to her evening. Celeste sank back into her seat, her hands trembling slightly despite her composed exterior. Anthony sat beside her, his voice low. "I can't just sit here and let her keep doing this." Celeste squeezed his hand. "We will handle it, but not by giving her the reaction she wants." Lila leaned against her mother's arm, her sketchbook forgotten in her lap. "Mom, are we still going to Zurich?" she asked, her voice small. Celeste kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, we are going. Nothing will stop us." The words were a promise, not just to her daughter but to herself. She would not allow anyone to strip this moment from them. The engines droned on, steady and indifferent. The sky outside was a sea of stars, yet inside the cabin, turbulence was already building, and it had nothing to do with the weather. The cabin lights dimmed further as dinner service began. Silverware clinked softly against porcelain dishes, and the smell of roasted chicken drifted through the first-class cabin. Passengers leaned back with glasses of wine, cocooned in the illusion of serenity. But for the Morgans, serenity had become a memory. A storm lingered just beyond the curtain to the galley, waiting to break. Celeste forced herself to sip her champagne. Though it tasted like metal now, her pulse was steady only because she had trained herself for steadiness. Years of surgery had taught her to hold composure even as a child's heartbeat faltered under her hands. Yet, this was different. In the operating room she had authority, respect, trust. Here, inside this pressurized capsule, her dignity was at the mercy of a flight attendant with a biased lens. Anthony sat rigid beside her, his shoulders squared as though preparing for battle. He kept glancing toward the galley curtain, expecting Samantha Blake to reappear. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "She is not finished. You know that, Right, I know, Celeste answered quietly. But so do the passengers around us. Every move she makes now will expose itself. Anthony shook his head. That doesn't comfort me. It only means she'll push harder. His hand tightened around his napkin, twisting the fabric into knots. Lila had gone silent. Her sketchbook lay open, but the pencil rested idle in her small hand. She stared at the untouched bread roll on her plate, her eyes heavy with questions she did not know how to ask. Celeste stroked her daughter's hair, whispering, "It's okay. Sweetie, we're okay." But even as she said it, she felt the cracks forming. The curtain rustled. Samantha emerged, her steps purposeful, her expression set. She carried no tray this time, only her handheld scanner. She stopped directly at their row. Conversations nearby quieted. Forks paused mid-air. The scene was a stage, and everyone knew the next act was about to begin. "Mr. Morgan," Samantha said, her tone clipped. "Our system still shows a flag on your reservation. I need you to come with me to the galley so we can resolve this matter privately." Anthony's voice was calm, but firm as stone. "I am not leaving my seat. We purchased these tickets. We are in the correct seats. You've verified this already." Samantha's smile was a polished mask. "Sir, if you refuse, I may have to involve the captain." "Then do it," Anthony replied, his voice louder now, drawing the attention of nearly everyone in first class. "Bring the captain here. Let him see how you're treating us." The attendant's mask faltered, her eyes narrowing. "Sir, there is no need to make a scene." Celeste spoke then, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "The scene is of your making. We are passengers with valid tickets. We will not be singled out for harassment. Bring your supervisor or bring the captain. Those are your only options." A hush settled. Even the flight attendant stationed near the galley seemed unsure, her eyes flicking nervously between Samantha and the Morgans. The passengers across the aisle leaned closer, some whispering, some frowning. A businessman muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath, though whether in sympathy or annoyance was unclear. Samantha's composure cracked. She straightened, her chin lifting. "Very well. If you insist, I'll request the captain. But understand this is highly irregular." With that, she turned sharply, heels clicking against the carpet as she disappeared once more behind the curtain. Anthony leaned back, exhaling slowly, his hands trembling slightly from the restraint of holding himself together. She is determined to humiliate us. Celeste placed a hand on his arm. She already has, but we won't let her win by becoming what she wants us to be. Her voice was low, steady, yet inside, a war raged. Every instinct screamed to unleash the anger she had suppressed all her life. But another voice, the one honed by years of standing in rooms where her authority was doubted, whispered, "Hold your ground." "Do not give them your fury," Lila whispered. "Mom, are they going to make us leave?" The fear in her tone pierced Celeste's heart. She bent closer, her words soft but fierce. "No one is going to take us off this plane. Do you understand me? We are going to Zurich. We are going together." Minutes dragged like hours. The murmur of other passengers filled the air. Some glanced sympathetically at the Morgans. Others shook their heads in irritation, as though the family's defense of their dignity were an inconvenience. That cut deeper than the stares. Silence had always been the accomplice of injustice. The curtain opened again. Samantha returned, But she was not alone. A man in uniform stepped out behind her. His presence carried immediate authority, tall, broad-shouldered. His pilot's jacket pressed, 4 golden stripes on his shoulders gleaming under the cabin lights. His face was calm, his eyes sharp. Captain Richard Hayes. Conversations ceased. Forks froze. The cabin stilled as though holding its breath. "Good evening," the captain said, his voice deep, steady, and commanding. He looked first at Samantha, then at the Morgans. What seems to be the issue, Samantha jumped to speak. "Captain, these passengers appear to have irregularities with their seat assignments. The system flagged them, and they've been uncooperative with my attempts to verify." The captain turned to Celeste and Anthony. His gaze was direct, searching not just their faces but the truth written in their eyes. "Is that correct?" Anthony spoke firmly. "No, Captain. We booked these tickets directly. We checked in, cleared security, boarded properly. We've been asked multiple times to show our passes and confirmation. We've complied every time. Yet we are still being treated as though we don't belong." The words hung heavy. The captain's eyes lingered on Celeste, then on Lila, who clutched her mother's hand tightly. Something flickered in his expression, a recognition that softened his steady demeanor. He turned slowly back to Samantha. "Show me the system," he said. Samantha faltered. "Captain, with respect, the system is secure. It flagged the show me," he repeated, his voice edged now, carrying the steel of command. The handheld device trembled slightly in Samantha's grip as she extended it. The captain scanned the screen, his jaw tightening, then handed it back. "There is no irregularity," he said. His tone left no room for argument. "These passengers are seated exactly where they're supposed to be." Samantha's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then muttered, "Yes, Captain." The captain turned back to the Morgans. His voice softened, though it carried an undercurrent of something deeper. "You are welcome here. Please continue to enjoy your flight. I apologize for the disturbance." Relief washed over Celeste, though it was tempered by the sting of what had already unfolded. She inclined her head slightly. "Thank you, Captain." Anthony exhaled, tension slipping from his shoulders, though his eyes still burned with anger. Lila looked at the captain with wide-eyed awe, her small voice whispering, "Thank you." The captain's gaze lingered on Celeste for a moment longer, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded once, firmly, before turning to Samantha. "Ms. Blake, join me in the galley. Now." The attendant followed, her posture rigid, her face pale. The curtain closed behind them, but the silence in the cabin spoke volumes. Passengers shifted, some shaking their heads, others whispering. A businessman raised his glass slightly in the Morgan's direction, a subtle gesture of solidarity. Celeste leaned back, finally sipping her champagne. The liquid was still sharp, but it no longer burned. Anthony reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. Lila nestled against her mother's arm, whispering. "Are we really safe now?" Celeste kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes," she said softly, "we are safe." But in her heart, she knew the real turbulence had only just begun. The curtain to the galley swung shut behind Captain Hayes and Samantha Blake, but the weight of their absence filled the cabin. A low murmur buzzed among the first-class passengers, speculation threading through whispers and side glances. Some turned their eyes back to their screens or meals, eager to sink back into the illusion of normalcy. Others could not resist looking again at the Morgans, curiosity written plain across their faces. Celeste sat upright, her expression calm but her chest still tight. Years of surgery had taught her to hold her breath in the moments before a heart either beat again or fell silent forever. This moment felt eerily similar, suspended, waiting for resolution. Anthony squeezed her hand, grounding her. Lila nestled closer, whispering, "Mom, why did the captain look at you like that?" Celeste hesitated. She had noticed it too. His gaze had lingered, as though she wasn't just another passenger, but there was no answer she could give her daughter yet. "We'll see," she murmured. In the galley, Samantha stood rigid, her back pressed to the counter, hands gripping her scanner like a lifeline. The captain's presence loomed. He did not raise his voice, but the authority in his tone was sharper than any shout. "Explain yourself," Hayes said evenly. Samantha swallowed. "Captain, I was following procedure. The system flagged." The system did not flag anything. Hayes cut her off, his eyes narrowing. "I saw it with my own eyes. So why did you single out that family?" Samantha's mouth opened, closed. They appeared irregular, their documents, their demeanor. "Stop," Hayes commanded, the word like a gavel. "You mean their appearance. Let's call it what it is." Her cheeks flushed crimson, her posture stiffening. "I meant no disrespect, sir. You were only what Hayes pressed. Exerting authority you do not have, creating humiliation where none was deserved. You jeopardize the dignity of paying passengers. Do you realize how serious that is?" Her voice cracked now, her confidence faltering. I didn't think it would escalate." "It escalated because you chose to make it escalate," Hayes said. His voice softened, but only slightly. "And you did it in front of a child." Samantha's throat tightened. She looked away, staring at the floor. Hayes exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. His mind replayed the image of the little girl clutching her mother's hand. Then his eyes drifted back to Celeste, sitting proud in her seat. A rush of memory surged through him, unbidden. A hospital room, monitors beeping, a surgeon in blue scrubs stepping out with steady eyes and steady hands. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "It's her." When he returned to the cabin, his expression was composed, but something beneath it had shifted. He paused by the Morgan's row, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Dr. Morgan," he said softly, testing the name on his tongue. Celeste looked up, startled. "You know me?" Hayes nodded, emotion flickering across his features. "We'll speak after takeoff service. For now, please know you're safe here." Celeste studied him, 1,000 questions rushing through her mind. She nodded once, silently. Anthony leaned closer as the captain walked away. "What was that about?" "I'm not sure," Celeste admitted, though part of her heart already knew. Memory stirred a case long ago, one among many, but perhaps unforgettable for someone else. Dinner service resumed, awkward but steady. Another attendant, younger and kinder-eyed, approached with trays of roasted chicken and mushroom risotto. She avoided mentioning Samantha, though the tension in her movements betrayed the storm brewing in the galley. Passengers cast sympathetic glances toward the Morgans now, as though proximity to the captain's words had shifted the air. Celeste forced herself to eat, though each bite tasted like dust. Her mind circled the same question. What did the captain mean? Lila tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," What if he knows you from the hospital? The possibility landed heavily. Celeste had treated thousands of patients. She had saved lives, held trembling hands, offered impossible hope. She rarely remembered every face, but families remembered. They remembered the surgeon who carried their future in her hands. Later, when the dinner trays were cleared and the cabin lights dimmed into a warm twilight glow, Captain Hayes returned. He crouched slightly by their row, his voice low but steady, intimate yet commanding. "Dr. Morgan," he began. "I didn't want to say more earlier, but I have to tell you, we've met before, 5 years ago. New York. My daughter." Celeste's breath caught. Images flickered in her mind. A pale girl, frail but bright-eyed, a heart defect deemed inoperable by most, parents who clung to each word she spoke, hours in the operating room, balancing science and prayer, the memory sharpened like glass. "Chloe," Celeste whispered. Hayes's eyes glistened. "Yes, Chloe. You held her heart in your hands for 9 hours. They told us she wouldn't live past 7. She's 12 now. She plays soccer. She wants to be an astronaut. She's alive because of you." Silence fell like a veil. Even Anthony froze, his anger dissolving into stunned disbelief. Lila looked from her mother to the captain, wonder shining in her eyes. Hayes's voice trembled, the mask of authority cracking to reveal the father beneath. "So when I say you are safe here, I mean it. This crew, this aircraft, everything I command it belongs to you. Because my family belongs to you. You gave us everything back." His words, though quiet, carried the weight of thunder. Passengers nearby stirred, sensing the gravity without hearing the details. Celeste felt tears prick her eyes. She had delivered life to families before, but rarely did gratitude find her again in such unexpected places. Anthony reached out, clasping the captain's arm. "Thank you," he said, his voice husky. Hayes nodded, standing tall again. "I will handle the matter with Ms. Blake. For the rest of this flight, you're to be treated with the highest respect. And if there is even a hint otherwise, you call me." "Understood." Celeste managed a faint smile. "Understood." He gave a small bow of his head, then returned to the galley, his presence leaving an echo in the air. Anthony leaned back, still dazed. Of all the flights in the world. Celeste's eyes lingered on the stars visible through the window. "Sometimes the world bends in ways we cannot predict," Lila whispered, almost reverent. "Mom, you saved his daughter." Celeste pulled her close, holding her tight. "Yes, baby, but tonight he reminded us that dignity cannot be stolen, not even at 30,000 feet. And somewhere in the galley, Samantha Blake stood alone, trembling. She had overheard enough to know her authority was gone. The very passenger she had sought to humiliate had been revealed as a hero to the man in command. The balance of power had shifted, and she was standing on quicksand. The galley smelled faintly of coffee and reheated rolls. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under fluorescent lights, but the air felt heavy, charged with tension. Samantha Blake stood with her back straight, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Though her hands trembled against her sleeves, she was a woman fighting to preserve an image that had already begun to collapse. Captain Hayes faced her, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. The hum of the engines outside filled the silence, a constant reminder of the world suspended at 30,000 feet. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hayes broke the quiet with a voice that was calm, deliberate, but edged with the weight of command. "You embarrassed this airline tonight," he said. "More importantly, you humiliated passengers who had done nothing wrong." Do you understand that Samantha bristled, her pride refusing to surrender? "Captain, I followed procedure. I thought no." Hayes interrupted, his tone sharp now. "You did not follow procedure. Procedure is to respect the documentation once it has been verified, not to invent obstacles when nothing is wrong. What you did was harassment, and I want to know why." Her throat tightened. She had no clear answer, only instinct, only the quiet prejudices that had shaped her judgments without her admitting them aloud. They didn't look. She stopped herself, but the words had already betrayed her. Hayes's eyes hardened. They didn't look what? "Ms. Blake. Like first-class passengers, like people who belong at the front of the plane. That is not your judgment to make." Her face flushed crimson. "I didn't mean it like that." "You did," Hayes said firmly, "and everyone could see it. You humiliated a father, a mother, and a child. And you did it to Dr. Celeste Morgan of all people." Samantha frowned, confusion cutting through her defensiveness. "Dr. Morgan, I don't understand." "Of course you don't," Hayes replied, his voice low but trembling with memory. "5 years ago, she saved my daughter's life, a surgery no one else dared attempt. 9 hours in the operating room, 9 years of fear lifted in a single moment. My Chloe is alive because of that woman, and you tried to reduce her to a ticketing error." The words hit like thunder. Samantha's breath caught. For the first time, her shield of pride cracked. The captain's authority was not abstract anymore. It was personal. His reverence for Celeste was unshakable, and she had stumbled into the worst possible storm. Hayes leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Do you realize how this looks to me, to the other passengers, to the airline? Once this inevitably comes to light, you did not just harass a family. You tried to diminish a surgeon whose hands have saved lives, including mine." Samantha's knees weakened. Her voice faltered. I didn't know. I didn't know who she was. You should not need to know someone's resume to treat them with dignity," Hayes said, his words sliced clean like a scalpel. "That is the lesson here, and it may cost you your career." Tears pricked Samantha's eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to crumble. "Captain, please." "I didn't mean." Hayes straightened, his voice once more professional, the voice of command. "For the remainder of this flight, you will treat the Morgans with the utmost respect. You will serve them as though they are the only passengers on this plane. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Captain," she whispered. "And when we land," Hayes continued, "you will report to management. I will be filing my own account of what happened here. You will not escape this." Her heart sank, a cold wave of dread rising in her chest. For 15 years she had worn the Navy uniform like armor. It had given her status, identity, authority. Now, in one flight, it all threatened to vanish like vapor in the sky. Hayes turned and pushed back the curtain, stepping into the cabin once more. Samantha remained, gripping the counter, staring at her reflection in the steel. For the first time, she saw herself as the passengers had seen her, not as a guardian of order, but as a bully who had mistaken prejudice for professionalism, and she hated the reflection staring back. In the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers whispered in subdued tones, piecing together fragments of what they had overheard. The businessman across the aisle murmured, "Did you hear the captain knows her?" A woman with pearl earrings leaned toward her husband. "Saved his daughter, apparently. Imagine that." Social media had not yet reached 30,000 feet, but curiosity traveled faster than Wi-Fi. Glances toward the Morgans were no longer laced with suspicion, but with something closer to awe. They were no longer simply passengers in seats, 2A, 2B, and 2C. They were central figures in a story that was beginning to write itself in the minds of everyone aboard. Celeste sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her posture steady. Inside, however, her thoughts swirled. She never asked for recognition. Each life she saved was its own reward. Yet tonight, her past had collided with her present in a way she could not ignore. The gratitude in Captain Hayes's eyes had been overwhelming, almost unbearable. She was not used to being called anyone's savior. She was used to simply doing her work. Anthony leaned closer. "Did you see the way the passengers are looking at you now?" "Yes," Celeste replied softly. "I don't know if it makes me feel stronger or more exposed." "You're stronger," Anthony said firmly. "Always stronger." Lila, wide-eyed, whispered, "Mom, does this mean the captain will protect us forever?" Celeste smiled faintly, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "It means that people remember kindness. Baby, they remember when someone fights for them, and sometimes it comes back when you least expect it." The dinner lights dimmed further, casting the cabin in a twilight glow. The hum of the engines grew louder as the aircraft soared through the night. But the Morgans knew this was only the calm between storms. What had begun at the gate in Los Angeles had followed them into the sky, and it would not end here. The story was already too big, too heavy. It was waiting to break free. In the galley, Samantha wiped her eyes quickly before stepping back into the aisle. Her professional smile had returned, but it was thinner, brittle. She carried a tray of desserts, her voice carefully steady as she offered creme brulee and cheesecake to passengers who accepted with polite indifference. When she reached the Morgans, she lowered her gaze, her hands trembling as she placed the plates gently on their tables. "Dr. Morgan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Mr. Morgan, Miss Morgan, I apologize. I was wrong." Celeste studied her, her surgeon's gaze stripping away the mask of professionalism to the raw fear beneath. She saw a woman desperate to salvage a career. Not yet someone who understood the true harm she had inflicted. "Thank you," Celeste said quietly, her tone polite but distant. "We accept the service." Samantha nodded quickly, her face pale, and moved on, her body stiff. Every passenger who watched knew what they were seeing: the fall of authority, the unraveling of arrogance. She had become a shadow of herself, serving quietly under the weight of her captain's rebuke and her own conscience. The Morgans ate in silence. Each bite of dessert tasted of tension, not sweetness. Yet under it all, Celeste felt something shifting. The humiliation of the gate and the aisle confrontation had left scars, but the captain's truth, his open gratitude, had planted something else too, a reminder that dignity could be reclaimed, that injustice could be met with grace. And, though Samantha tried to melt into the background, her presence remained a constant echo. Every glass poured, every plate cleared was another silent acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. The real confrontation, Celeste knew, would not come at 30,000 feet. It would come when the wheels touched down. When the world outside the aircraft heard what had happened inside, the cabin had settled into a strange quiet, the kind that followed storms rather than preceded them. Dinner trays had been cleared, lights dimmed, and most passengers tucked themselves into the cocoon of their pods. The hum of the engines pressed steadily against the fuselage, a lullaby for some, but for others. The silence only made the tension louder. Celeste sat upright, her seat reclined but not fully flat. Her mind refused rest. She thought of the moment Hayes had spoken her name, of the memory he carried like a talisman. She had saved his daughter, but she had not expected that act of compassion to become her shield years later at 30,000 feet. Gratitude, she realized, had a way of echoing through time, circling back when least expected. Anthony had managed to close his eyes, though his breathing told her he was not asleep. He was forcing himself into stillness, the way architects sometimes stood back and waited for a structure to settle before taking the next step. Beside her, Lila had finally surrendered to sleep, her head resting against Celeste's arm, her sketchbook still open across her lap. The pencil drawings of mountains and stars had smudged slightly, her small hand pressed against the page. Across the aisle, however, one passenger was wide awake. Jordan Ellis, a travel blogger with a growing following online, sat with his laptop balanced carefully on the tray table. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his screen casting a pale blue glow across his determined face. He had witnessed everything, from the first tense exchange at boarding to the captain's extraordinary words in the aisle. He had recognized the power of the moment instantly. For years, Jordan had written about flight reviews, the subtle luxuries of seat designs, and the little indignities of airline travel. But this was different. This was not about legroom or champagne quality. This was about dignity, about prejudice, about a captain declaring a family his personal heroes in front of an entire cabin. It was the kind of story that could ripple across the world, and Jordan, his instincts sharp, was determined to be the first to tell it. He typed with urgency, capturing every detail while it was still fresh in his mind. He described Samantha Blake's initial smile, thin and false. He noted the hesitation in passengers who had looked away when the Morgans were being humiliated at the gate. He recreated the way Captain Hayes had cut through the tension with the authority of 6 words. "Why is my flight being delayed?" He wrote about Celeste's composure, the strength in Anthony's voice, the innocence in Lila's trembling questions. His fingers shaped the narrative into a parable, the kind of modern story that burned across social media like fire. But he hesitated before pressing save. Should he? To witness was one thing, but to expose was another. He glanced at Celeste, still awake, her arm curled protectively around her daughter. She looked regal even in her exhaustion, the quiet strength of someone who had spent her life carrying burdens heavier than most could imagine. He wondered if she would even want the story told. Would it be an invasion or a defense? Jordan leaned back, closing the laptop for now. The engines hummed louder as the aircraft cut through thin air. He decided to wait. There would be time later, when they landed. For now, he would hold the story close, like a spark waiting for the right kindling. Meanwhile, in the galley, Samantha Blake moved like a ghost. She poured wine, delivered water, cleared trays, but her movements were mechanical, stripped of the sharp authority she once wielded like a weapon. Passengers avoided eye contact. To them, she was no longer the polished professional in navy blue. She was the woman who had been publicly corrected, diminished by her captain and the truth. Inside, Samantha's thoughts spiraled. She had built her identity on control, on the belief that she was the gatekeeper of order in a chaotic world of airports and aircraft. But tonight, her control had shattered. The memory of Hayes's words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. You did not need to know someone's resume to treat them with dignity. She thought of her own family, her younger brother who had once been denied a job interview because of his tattoos, her mother who had been judged for her accent. Had she not raged at those injustices, and yet, tonight, she had inflicted her own. The realization was like a weight pressing on her chest. Still, she could not bring herself to face it fully. Pride and fear warred within her, each demanding her allegiance. She delivered another round of drinks and returned to the galley, where she gripped the counter and closed her eyes. Sleep would not come for her tonight, not with the storm she had unleashed. Hours passed. The cabin grew quieter, filled with the soft snores of weary travelers and the muted glow of seat-back screens, looping films no one was truly watching. Outside, stars shimmered against the velvet darkness, distant and eternal. Captain Hayes sat in the cockpit, the glow of instruments painting his face in shades of green and amber. His co-pilot handled the routine communications, but Hayes's thoughts drifted again to the cabin. He replayed the look on Celeste's face when he had spoken her name, the way disbelief had softened into recognition. He thought of Chloe, his daughter, now asleep at home in Houston, dreaming of rocket ships. He imagined the Morgan's little girl someday standing beside her, both reaching for the stars. The flight was routine, yet nothing about tonight felt routine. Hayes knew the story would not remain contained. Someone had witnessed it. Someone would tell it. And when it did, the airline would face a reckoning. By the time the faint glow of dawn appeared on the horizon, stretching a pale line of light across the curve of the earth, the passengers of first class stirred awake. Blankets were folded, seats returned upright, and breakfast trays distributed with weary smiles. Celeste accepted coffee, her hands wrapped gratefully around the warmth. Anthony stretched, his back stiff, his mind still replaying the confrontations of the night. Lila yawned, her sketchbook now filled with dreams drawn in pencil. Jordan Ellis reopened his laptop. The words from the night before stared back at him, urgent, insistent. The story needed to be told. He began refining it, shaping it into something more than notes. His headline formed slowly, deliberately. Flight attendant challenges black family in first class. Then the captain reveals a secret that changes everything. He could already see the impact, the shares, the comments. This was not just a story about air travel. It was a story about justice, about memory, about gratitude breaking prejudice. He saved the draft, waiting for Wi-Fi to return once they descended. The moment they touched the ground, the story would take off faster than the jet had at Los Angeles. Celeste looked out the window as sunlight spilled across the clouds. For a brief moment, it felt as though the ugliness of the night had been left behind, dissolved in the darkness. But deep down, she knew the truth. The world would not let this stay hidden. Stories like this did not remain secrets, and once it reached beyond this cabin, the consequences would ripple further than any of them could imagine. She reached for Anthony's hand, squeezing it once. He squeezed back, together. They sat in silence, bracing for the storm that was waiting at the end of the runway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Zurich. Please return your seats to the upright position and fasten your seat belts. We expect smooth skies on the way down, with local time just after 8 in the morning. Thank you for flying with us." The announcement should have been routine, a polite reminder before landing. Yet, for Celeste Morgan, it carried an undercurrent of inevitability. They had risen above the storm of the night, but now gravity was pulling them back down to earth, and waiting on the ground, she sensed, was a new storm altogether. Lila stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. The first thing she did was reach for her sketchbook, flipping through the drawings she had made before falling asleep. She smiled, tracing the outline of mountains she had never seen, then pressed her face against the window. "Mama, look. It is so bright. Is that Switzerland?" Celeste smiled softly, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, baby. That is Switzerland. We are almost there." Anthony adjusted his tie, his mind already shifting into protective mode. He had been quiet through most of the night, his anger carefully contained, but he had not forgotten a single detail. He was ready for questions, for explanations, for whatever might come once the wheels touched the ground. In row 3, Jordan Ellis's laptop balanced on the tray table once again. The Wi-Fi indicator finally blinked green as the aircraft descended into coverage range. With a deep breath, he pressed publish. His story, polished and vivid, streamed out into the digital ether. Within seconds, it was live on his blog, tagged and primed for sharing. The title was bold, almost cinematic. "Flight attendant refuses black family boarding. Then the pilot calls them his owners." He watched the page reload, saw the first comments appear, then the first retweets. The numbers began climbing rapidly. 10 views, 30, 100, 1,000. He had seen viral stories before, but never from his own hands. He felt the thrill and weight of it all at once. There was no going back now. The aircraft touched down smoothly on Zurich's tarmac, the thud of wheels followed by the rising roar of reverse thrusters. Passengers sat forward as the jet slowed, many already turning their phones back on. Notifications began buzzing like bees in a hive. Screens lit up, headlines flashing. Within minutes, murmurs spread through the cabin. "Have you seen this?" whispered a businessman to his colleague. "This is about our flight." A young woman 2 rows back gasped, scrolling her phone. "Oh my God, it is them. It is this plane." People turned their heads, subtle glances falling toward the Morgans. Some were sympathetic, others curious. A few uncomfortably guilty for having stayed silent during the ordeal. Celeste felt the shift instantly. Whispers had a way of finding their target. She leaned closer to Anthony. "Something is happening. People are looking at us differently." He checked his phone, eyes widening as he opened a trending feed. He turned the screen to her. It was Jordan's headline, already climbing toward the top of social media platforms. Thousands of shares, thousands of comments. He exhaled. It is out there, Celeste. The world already knows. She sat back, a quiet weight settling in her chest. She had not asked for this spotlight, but it had found her anyway. She thought of her daughter, of the patients whose lives she still needed to save, of the quiet dignity she had always tried to carry. Now, all of it was part of a public story. As the aircraft rolled to a stop at the gate, The seatbelt sign chimed off, and passengers rose to collect their belongings. The Morgans stayed seated, instinctively waiting for the aisle to clear. But before they could move, a tall woman in a tailored navy suit appeared at the door, flanked by two uniformed airline staff. She held a placard with the Morgan name printed neatly across it. Dr. Morgan, Mr. Morgan, Miss Morgan, I am Elise Hartman, Regional Operations Director for Global Skies in Europe. On behalf of the airline, I would like to extend our sincerest apologies for the treatment you experienced last night. Her voice was polished, diplomatic, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the passengers who were now craning their necks to watch. She gestured toward the jet bridge. Please, come with me. We have a private lounge prepared, and arrangements have been made for your onward stay. Anthony's brows furrowed. That was fast. Celeste gave him a knowing glance. Not fast. Strategic. The story is already burning through the internet. They are trying to control it before it gets bigger. They gathered their belongings. Lila clutching her sketchbook close and stepped into the jet bridge. Behind them, whispers grew louder. Phones lifted discreetly to capture photos. Jordan Ellis, laptop tucked under his arm, gave them a small nod as they passed. Celeste met his eyes briefly. She knew. She knew who had told the world. In the private lounge, the scene was surreal. Crystal glasses of juice and water gleamed on a polished table. A tray of Swiss chocolates sat untouched. Elise Hartman leaned forward, her voice smoother now, carrying the practiced cadence of corporate damage control. We are deeply sorry. What happened to your family was unacceptable and does not reflect our values. The flight attendant in question has been suspended pending investigation. The captain has filed his full report. Our CEO is personally aware of the situation. Celeste listened, her face calm but unreadable. She'd seen this before in boardrooms and in hospitals, the polished language of institutions scrambling to contain liability. She folded her hands, choosing her words carefully. Ms. Hartman, with all respect, this is not about one flight attendant. This is about a culture that allows prejudice to hide behind procedure. My daughter was humiliated in front of strangers. My husband was treated like a trespasser, and I was dismissed as though I did not belong. An apology does not erase that. Elise's smile faltered. I understand. Dr. Morgan, please know that the airline is committed to meaningful change. We are prepared to offer your family a full refund, a complimentary upgrade for your return, and a substantial donation in your name to the Zurich Children's Hospital. Anthony leaned forward, his tone firm. With all due respect, no amount of chocolate or money will erase the look on my daughter's face last night. This is not just about us. It is about how many other families face this same treatment, but do not have a captain to intervene or a story to go viral. Elise hesitated, the weight of their words landing. She knew she was not speaking only to them now. She was speaking to the audience beyond the glass, the world already following the story online. Her voice softened. You are right, and I will take that message back to leadership. Celeste nodded, her tone calm but resolute. Do that, because this is bigger than us. It always was. By the time they were escorted to a waiting car outside the terminal, the world had fully awakened to their story. Notifications flashed across every device. News outlets had already picked up Jordan's blog, quoting passengers, amplifying hashtags, and Flight 112 trended globally, Captain Hayes' hero trended alongside it, and at the center of it all, their names, their faces, their dignity finally seen and defended, even as the weight of exposure pressed heavily upon them. Celeste slid into the back seat of the car, Lila resting against her side, Anthony holding her hand. Outside, Zurich moved with quiet order, trams gliding along clean streets, morning commuters sipping coffee. Life went on. Yet, for them, nothing would be the same. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, whispering to herself, "Let this not be just a spectacle. Let it be a turning point." The car pulled away from the terminal, carrying them into a day that would test not just their resilience but the conscience of an entire industry. By the time the Morgans reached their hotel in Zurich, the story had grown wings of its own. News vans parked outside, cameras pointed at the entrance, journalists crowding the lobby with microphones in hand. The staff, flustered but courteous, ushered the family through a side entrance, shielding them from the flashing bulbs. Celeste felt the surreal dissonance of it all. Just 24 hours ago, they were another family with boarding passes, heading for a conference and sightseeing. Now, they were unwilling symbols in a global conversation. Every screen seemed to display their faces. Headlines scrolled across CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. Black family blocked from boarding pilot defends them with stunning words. Hashtags trended in multiple languages. Memes circulated with pictures of Captain Hayes beside the word hero. Inside the suite, Anthony pulled the curtains closed. His phone buzzed endlessly, vibrating against the marble table. Texts poured in from colleagues, distant cousins, college friends, even old clients. Some offered support, some sought confirmation, others simply wanted proximity to the headline of the hour. He silenced the phone, overwhelmed. Lila sat cross-legged on the carpet, her sketchbook open but forgotten. She stared at the television, her wide eyes absorbing the commentary of polished anchors. They kept repeating her mother's name, praising her as a surgeon, as a pioneer, as a victim of injustice. It was strange for her, hearing strangers say her mother's name like it belonged to the world. "Mama," she whispered, "do they all know about us now?" Celeste crouched beside her, brushing a hand against her cheek. "Yes, baby, they do. But remember, we are still just us, no matter what the television says." Lila nodded, though confusion lingered in her eyes. She was too young to understand the machinery of media, but old enough to feel the weight of attention. Thousands of miles away, in Atlanta, the headquarters of Global Skies pulsed with chaos. The glass tower, usually a monument of corporate calm, was alive with urgent footsteps, glowing screens, and frantic conference calls. On the top floor, CEO Robert Langford sat at the head of a mahogany table, his jaw tight as he scrolled through live updates. "This is a full-scale crisis," said Marjorie Chen, the company's chief communications officer. "The story is everywhere. We are being accused of systemic racism, gatekeeping prejudice, hostile work environments. The hashtags are brutal. We are already seeing cancellations and refund demands spike by the hour." Langford rubbed his temples. "We issued an apology through our regional director in Zurich. Was that not enough?" "Not even close," Marjorie replied, her voice sharp. "The apology is being called hollow and performative. People want accountability, not platitudes." The head of HR chimed in, flipping through a file. "Samantha Blake has been suspended. We can announce her termination by end of day." Langford slammed the file shut. "Firing one attendant will not solve this. Do you not understand? This is bigger than Samantha. This is about culture. The passengers are saying the captain saved the day, that leadership must answer for why this happened in the first place. Silence thickened around the table. Finally, Marjorie leaned forward. Then we lean into Captain Hayes. We highlight his integrity. We make him the face of Global Sky's values. He becomes the hero of the narrative, not the villain. "And what about the Morgans?" Langford asked. "They are at the center of this." Marjorie's eyes flicked to the screen showing Celeste's photo on a news broadcast. "We extend every courtesy. We offer donations in her name. We invite her to join a diversity council. But make no mistake, this family is not just passengers anymore. They are the voice of accountability. If we handle this wrong, we lose the public." Langford leaned back, his expression grim. He knew the airline's reputation, built over decades, now teetered on the edge. One story, one family, had more power than entire marketing budgets. Meanwhile, Jordan Ellis sat in a Zurich cafe, watching his laptop light up with notifications. His blog post had been shared by a major influencer with 2 million followers, then picked up by the Associated Press. His site crashed twice under the traffic. Emails flooded his inbox. Interview requests from morning shows, offers from publishers, partnerships from media outlets. He felt both exhilarated and uneasy. He had always dreamed of breaking a story that mattered, one that transcended seat width and in-flight meals. But he also knew the Morgans had not asked for this spotlight. He sipped his coffee, staring at the headline again, wondering if he had done the right thing. His phone buzzed, a message from Celeste. "I know it was you. Thank you for telling the truth." Jordan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Relief washed through him. They knew, and they did not hate him for it. Perhaps, he thought, the story really did belong to the world. Back in the hotel suite, Celeste prepared for her keynote address. The conference organizers had pleaded with her to still attend. She had agreed, not because she craved the stage, but because she believed in the science, in the children who needed hope. Yet now the audience would not see her only as a surgeon. They would see her as a symbol. Anthony helped her adjust her notes, his hands steady even as his mind churned with worry. "Are you sure you are ready for this? It is no longer just about medicine. They will ask about what happened on the plane." Celeste paused, looking at herself in the mirror. She saw not just the doctor, not just the mother, but the woman who had been forced to stand against humiliation and still hold her head high. She nodded. "Then I will answer, not for us, but for everyone who has ever been told they do not belong." Lila tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, can I come to your speech?" Celeste smiled, kneeling down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Of course, baby. You should see what it looks like when truth is spoken out loud." As the sun set over Atlanta, Global Sky's headquarters prepared for the next day's press conference. Langford rehearsed statements, Marjorie adjusted talking points, and the legal team crafted disclaimers. Yet none of them could predict what would come when Celeste stepped onto the stage in Zurich the following morning. Because for all their power and planning, the heart of the story did not belong to them anymore. It belonged to the family who had been judged at a gate, defended by a captain, and elevated by a world hungry for justice. And as night deepened across time zones, the world leaned closer, waiting for the next chapter. Morning sunlight spilled across Zurich, the lake shimmering like glass beneath the Alpine peaks. In the grand hall of the World Congress of Pediatric Medicine, rows of polished chairs stretched toward a stage framed by soft blue lighting. Delegates from across the globe murmured as they shuffled their programs, expecting data, clinical trials, and graphs. But many had also read the headlines that morning. They knew her name, not just for her research, but for what had happened in the skies above the Atlantic. Backstage. Celeste Morgan adjusted her blazer, her pulse steady but strong. She had delivered hundreds of presentations before, but this felt different. She was not walking into a lecture. She was walking into history, though not the kind she had ever sought. Anthony stood at her side, his hand a firm anchor on her shoulder. "You do not have to talk about it," he said quietly. "They invited you for your science. You owe them that and nothing more." Celeste looked at him, her gaze calm. "And if I stop at science, they will leave thinking my work ends at the heart muscle. But medicine is also about the world in which those hearts must live. If I have their ears, then I will not waste their silence." Lila stood near the corner, holding her sketchbook like a talisman. She beamed at her mother with wide, unwavering eyes. "Mama, you're going to be amazing. You always are." Celeste bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "That is all the courage I need." A stage manager appeared with a headset, signaling, "Dr. Morgan, you are on." Celeste walked out, the applause rising to greet her. She paused behind the lectern, letting the sound settle. The audience saw a poised woman in a tailored navy suit, but behind her eyes lived a night of humiliation, resolve, and quiet fire. She began with steady voice. "Good morning. I was invited here to speak about pediatric cardiology, about the work my team has been doing to repair tiny hearts and extend fragile lives, and I will speak of that. But before I do, I must tell you a story." A hush fell instantly. Screens dimmed, pens lowered. Even those who had been skeptical leaned in. "Yesterday, my family and I stood at the gate of a flight meant to bring us here. We had boarding passes, seat numbers, our luggage checked. We had earned our place, like any other traveler. Yet we were told we did not belong. We were made to wait while others boarded. We were humiliated in front of our daughter, and it was not because of a system error, it was because of who we are and how we look." Her voice did not waver. The words carried across the hall, landing like stones in still water. What saved us was not policy. What saved us was a man, a captain, who remembered a day years ago when I held his daughter's heart in my hands. He said we owned him. But what he meant was gratitude, gratitude that life had allowed him to repay. She paused, scanning the room, and while that moment redeemed our flight, it did not erase what happened before, because not every family has a captain who remembers. Not every family has a witness who writes a blog. Too many families walk away carrying only the weight of silence. Anthony, watching from the side, felt a swell in his chest. She was not just speaking as a doctor. She was speaking as a mother, as a citizen, as a woman refusing to bow. Celeste shifted, her tone softening as she opened the next chapter of her talk. "I study the human heart. It is a small organ, yet it carries every dream, every memory, every injustice, and every act of grace. When a heart is wounded, whether by disease or by prejudice, the body suffers. Healing requires more than sutures and vessels. It requires dignity." She gestured toward the large screen behind her, which now displayed images of tiny patients she had treated, children smiling after surgeries once deemed impossible. These children remind us that survival is not enough. Thriving requires a society willing to honor their humanity, regardless of color, wealth, or background. The hall was silent, hanging on each word. Journalists in the back tapped furiously at their keyboards, realizing the keynote had shifted into something far larger than science. Cameras flashed. A live stream counter ticked higher as thousands tuned in online. Celeste concluded with calm strength. I came here to share breakthroughs in pediatric cardiology, and I will. But I also came carrying the weight of last night. If I can leave you with one truth, it is this: our work as healers does not stop at the operating table. It must extend into the world, where every child deserves not only a healthy heart, but a world that will never question its worth. Applause erupted, not polite but thunderous. Delegates rose to their feet, clapping until their palms stung. Some wiped tears discreetly, others nodded with fierce approval. Celeste stood still for a moment, absorbing the energy, then bowed her head in gratitude. Backstage, Lila threw her arms around her mother. "Mama, you were brave. You told the truth." Celeste hugged her tight, whispering, "Always tell the truth, my love, even when the world is not ready for it." Across the Atlantic, in Atlanta headquarters, Global Skies executives watched the live stream with grim expressions. Langford drummed his fingers on the table, jaw clenched. "This is no longer just a passenger complaint," he muttered. "This is a global reckoning." Marjorie Chen leaned forward, her eyes locked on the screen. "Then we respond in kind. We cannot bury this. We cannot spin it. We have to meet it." Langford sighed. "Arrange a press conference. Tomorrow morning. I will address this myself and find out what it will take to bring Dr. Morgan to the table. If she wants systemic reform, we will offer systemic reform. If she wants funding, we will fund. We are not negotiating with a doctor anymore. We are negotiating with a symbol." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the stakes. Their airline's future depended not just on planes and profits, but on how they answered the moral weight of one woman's story. Meanwhile, in Zurich, the conference hall buzzed with journalists clamoring for interviews. Celeste declined most, offering only brief, careful statements. Her work, she insisted, was not about her alone, but about broader truths. Yet, even as she tried to shield her family, she could not escape the tidal wave of attention. Anthony pulled her aside as they exited the hall, his voice low. "You realize you have just become the face of this entire movement." Celeste's eyes softened, a flicker of weariness visible. "I never asked for that." "I know," Anthony said, "but maybe you were chosen for it." She said nothing, only tightening her grip on his hand as they walked through the throng. Lila skipped between them, oblivious to the weight her parents carried, humming softly to herself. That night, as the city lights glittered against the lake, Celeste sat alone by the window of their suite. She opened her notebook, not her medical charts, but a personal journal she rarely shared. She wrote slowly, carefully. "We do not choose when the world demands our voice. But when it does, we must speak with clarity, not just for ourselves, but for those who cannot. Tonight I wonder what doors this will open and what battles it will bring. I am afraid for my family, yet proud of what we stood against. If justice is a journey, then perhaps this is just the boarding gate. She closed the book, her reflection layered against the city skyline. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to exhale. Tomorrow would bring more cameras, more questions, more storms. But for tonight, she was simply Celeste Morgan, mother, surgeon, survivor, and unwilling symbol of a world in need of repair. Morning in Atlanta broke heavy with humidity, the skyline wrapped in gray haze as reporters swarmed outside the Gleeman headquarters of Global Skies. Satellite trucks lined the boulevard, their antennas stabbing upward like a forest of steel branches. Journalists rehearsed lines into microphones, camera crews fussed with cables, and bystanders pressed against barricades hoping to glimpse the drama inside. On the 20th floor, Robert Langford adjusted his tie for the third time. He was not a man who liked being cornered, but today he had no choice. The board demanded action, shareholders demanded reassurance, and the world demanded accountability. Every television in the lobby blared coverage of Dr. Celeste Morgan's keynote, clips of her steady voice declaring dignity as essential as medicine played in endless loops. Marjorie Chen swept into the conference room, tablet in hand, her tone brisk. The press conference is set for 10 sharp. We have confirmed live feeds with CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. Social media streams will carry it worldwide. Langford exhaled through his nose, and Captain Hayes. She tapped her screen. He agreed to appear. He landed in Atlanta an hour ago. Frankly, he is the only one keeping us from total collapse. Langford's eyes narrowed. A pilot as our savior. Imagine that. In a smaller briefing room down the hall, Richard Hayes tugged at the cuffs of his uniform. The navy fabric bore 4 gold stripes on each sleeve. But today, it felt less like authority and more like armor. He had not sought this spotlight. All he had done was what seemed right. Yet somehow, that single decision in an aisle had become a global symbol. A junior press officer handed him a water bottle. "Captain, the CEO will open. You will follow with your statement. Keep it personal. They need to see your sincerity." Hayes nodded, though unease tugged at his chest. He thought of Chloe, watching from their living room in Houston, and of his wife who had whispered that morning, "Whatever happens, just be honest. The world already knows your heart." At exactly 10, the doors opened. Langford stepped onto the podium, cameras flashing in a rapid staccato. He cleared his throat, his baritone voice amplified through dozens of microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Global Skies was founded on principles of safety, service, and respect. Yesterday, those principles were tested. A family was denied boarding, treated in a way that fell far short of our values. For that, we are deeply sorry." He paused, letting the words sink. The flashbulbs burned. An internal investigation confirmed unacceptable conduct by one of our flight attendants. She has been terminated effective immediately. But this is not just about one employee. It is about ensuring our culture reflects the dignity every passenger deserves. Reporters shouted questions, but Langford raised a hand. "Today, you will also hear from the captain of that flight, a man whose actions reminded us all of what leadership looks like." He stepped aside, and Richard Hayes approached the microphones. The room shifted. This was the moment the world had come for. Hayes placed both hands on the podium, grounding himself. He spoke not like an executive, not like a politician, but like a man recalling a truth carved into his bones. 5 years ago, My daughter was 7 years old and dying. She had a congenital heart defect no one believed could be repaired. Doctors told us to prepare for goodbye. And then we met Dr. Celeste Morgan. She took the risk others would not. She held my daughter's fragile heart in her hands for 9 hours. Because of her, my Chloe is alive today. She plays soccer. She dreams of being an astronaut. She has a future. He paused, his voice thickening. So when I saw Dr. Morgan and her family being humiliated at the gate, treated as if they did not belong, I could not stay silent. I told the attendant what I knew to be true, that she and her family had every right to be there, that I owed them more than words could ever repay. His gaze swept the room. I'm not here to polish the airline's image. I am here to tell you what I witnessed. Dr. Morgan is not just a passenger. She's not just a black woman who was disrespected. She's a healer who has saved lives, and no family, no matter who they are, should be made to feel lesser when they walk to their seat. The room erupted with questions, but Hayes stepped back, his peace delivered. The sincerity in his voice reverberated across the broadcast. Inside the Zurich hotel suite, Celeste, Anthony, and Lila watched the live stream. The applause that followed Hayes' speech traveled even across the ocean. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Anthony touched her shoulder. He stood up for you, for us. Celeste nodded, whispering. He stood up for the truth. Lila clapped along with the television, her eyes shining. Mama, Captain Hayes is brave. Celeste hugged her daughter, thinking of the strange web of fate that had bound their families forever. Back in Atlanta, the press conference continued. Reporters demanded to know what reforms would follow. Langford, coached and careful, announced a sweeping review of training programs, new bias awareness requirements, and a passenger advisory council that would include Dr. Morgan if she chose to participate. But even as he spoke, the focus remained on Hayes. His words were replayed in real time, quoted in headlines. Within hours, clips of his testimony were trending, captioned with lines like, "The pilot who owed everything." For Samantha Blake, the day unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. Alone in her small apartment, she sat hunched on her couch, the blinds drawn tight. The news showed her photo over and over, the words "terminated" and "misconduct" flashing beneath. Her phone buzzed with messages she no longer opened. Former colleagues blocked her. Neighbors whispered in hallways. She replayed the moment at the gate again and again. The smug tilt of her chin, the dismissive flick of her hand. She had thought herself powerful, a gatekeeper. Now she was a cautionary tale. Her career, her identity, erased in one viral headline. Her mother's voice echoed in her head from the night before. People are not chess pieces. Samantha, they are not for you to move or dismiss. She buried her face in her hands, tears hot and bitter. For the first time, she began to see what she had done not as a mistake of procedure, but as a wound inflicted on flesh and spirit. As evening settled across Europe, Celeste sat by the window overlooking the glittering lake. The day had been a storm, yet beneath it all she felt a calm resolve. The world might spin headlines, executives might scramble, and Samantha might crumble in shame. But what mattered was the lesson reaching those who needed it most. She thought of her patients, children with tiny scars across their chests, who would grow into adults facing a world that might judge them unfairly. She thought of Lila, still innocent, still hopeful. She thought of Anthony, steadfast beside her. And she thought of Hayes, a man who had chosen compassion over silence. Justice, she realized, was not a single moment of triumph. It was a series of choices, each building toward something larger. Today had been one of those choices. Tomorrow would bring another, and, for the first time since stepping into that gate, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, through grace and courage, change was truly possible. Zurich's night air was crisp, the lake shimmering under the glow of street lamps. Inside their hotel suite, Celeste Morgan tucked Lila into bed, smoothing a curl away from her daughter's forehead. Anthony leaned against the doorway, watching with quiet pride. For all the chaos of the last 2 days, here was the anchor, the three of them together, safe, whole. But sleep did not come easily to Celeste. Long after Lila's breathing deepened, she sat by the window, journal open, pen hovering above the page. Headlines still flashed on her phone. Pilot's speech goes viral. Global Skies promises reform. Doctor Who saved captain's daughter becomes global voice for justice. The weight of it pressed on her shoulders. She had not chosen this spotlight, yet it had chosen her. Down the hall, Anthony approached, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You can't carry all of it," he murmured. "You can only carry what belongs to you." Celeste looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and fatigue. "What belongs to me is my voice, and I will use it." Across the ocean, Samantha Blake sat in her mother's kitchen in a quiet suburb of Dallas. The linoleum floor was scuffed, the cupboards chipped, the refrigerator humming louder than usual. She had fled here after the termination, dragging a single suitcase behind her. For days she had refused to watch the news. But that evening, her mother had turned the television toward her, insisting. The press conference played again, Langford's contrite words, Captain Hayes's trembling voice as he spoke of his daughter. The thunderous applause. Samantha sat frozen, the shame a raw ache inside her. For the first time, she saw not just herself at the gate, but the reflection of her cruelty in Celeste's daughter's tearful face. Her mother's voice was steady but firm. "You built walls, Samantha. You thought they made you strong. But walls don't just keep people out, they lock you in." Samantha bowed her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know how to undo it." "You can't undo, but you can repent. That's harder. It takes your whole life." The following week, Global Skies arranged a formal meeting in Zurich. Executives, lawyers, and communications officers filled a sleek glass conference room. Celeste entered with Anthony beside her. Lila left in the care of a family friend. She wore no lab coat, only a simple dress, her presence commanding without effort. Langford stood as she approached. "Dr. Morgan, thank you for agreeing to meet. We want to apologize directly." Celeste inclined her head, her voice calm. "Words are easy. What matters is action." Marjorie Chen slid forward a proposal, a fund for equitable access to air travel, new anti-discrimination training, a public donation to pediatric cardiology research. The numbers were impressive, but Celeste's expression remained unreadable. "This is a start," she said. "But this cannot be a headline fix. It must be culture. Until every passenger, from first class to economy, feels respect, your problem remains." Langford nodded stiffly. "We are prepared to establish a permanent passenger equity council, and we would like you to chair it." Celeste's brow furrowed. "I am a surgeon, not a corporate figurehead. Precisely why, Marjorie added quickly. People trust you because you do not seek this role. That is why your voice carries weight. Celeste considered in silence. Anthony leaned close, whispering, "This could be a platform to build something lasting." Finally, she spoke. "I will agree on one condition. Samantha Blake must hear from me directly. Not as punishment, but as truth. If your culture is to change, it begins with those who caused the harm." The room fell silent. Langford shifted uncomfortably, but Marjorie's eyes flickered with approval. It was, she realized, the most human form of justice. 2 weeks later, Samantha sat in a plain meeting room in Dallas, her hands trembling as the door opened. Celeste walked in, her presence steady, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence itself felt like a trial. Finally, Samantha whispered, "I don't deserve this meeting." Celeste sat across from her, folding her hands. "You don't, but you need it, and so do I." Samantha's eyes filled. "I can't explain what I did at the gate. I told myself it was about rules, but it wasn't. It was bitterness. It was prejudice, and I let it touch your daughter. That is what I see in my nightmares. Her face." Celeste's gaze softened, though her voice stayed firm. "You wounded more than my daughter. You wounded trust. You turned authority into a weapon. And when you did, you became small." Samantha bowed her head. "I am small." Celeste leaned forward. "Then you must decide if you will stay that way. Repentance is not hashtags or apologies scripted by lawyers. It is work, it is service, it is looking into the eyes of those you once judged and seeing their full humanity." Tears slid down Samantha's face. "How do I even begin? Start where you are. Volunteer. Serve the people you once dismissed. Learn humility, and never forget that every action ripples outward." Samantha nodded slowly, clutching the words as if they were lifelines. Celeste rose, smoothing her coat. "I am not here to forgive or condemn. That belongs to time. I am here to remind you the next choice is yours." She turned and left, leaving Samantha with her tears and the faint glimmer of a path forward. Months later, life had begun to settle into new rhythms. Global Skies launched the Equity in Flight initiative, its advertisements carrying Celeste's words, "Dignity is not a privilege. It is a right." Training programs rolled out worldwide. Passengers noticed subtle changes, and industry competitors began to follow suit. In Houston, Captain Hayes flew again, Chloe cheering from the sidelines of her soccer games. In Dallas, Samantha worked quietly at a food pantry, stacking cans beside strangers who knew nothing of her past. It was not redemption, but it was a beginning. And in New York, Celeste returned to the operating room. Her hands were steady as ever, her focus sharp. Yet something in her had shifted. Each time she scrubbed in, she carried not only the weight of saving a child's heart, but the reminder that healing stretched beyond the body. One evening, after a long surgery, she came home to find Lila drawing at the table. The sketch showed an airplane, soaring above mountains, light bursting from its wings. "What's this?" Celeste asked. "It's us," Lila said proudly, "on our way to Zurich. Except this time, everyone gets to fly without being afraid." Celeste's throat tightened. She hugged her daughter, holding her close. "That," she whispered, "is the dream." The story of Flight 709 did not fade into a forgotten headline. It became a touchstone, retold in classrooms, boardrooms, and community halls. Some called it a scandal, others a turning point. But for those who lived it, it was simply truth humiliation met by dignity, prejudice disarmed by grace, and justice carried forward by courage. Celeste never thought of herself as a hero. She was a doctor, a wife, a mother. Yet in the quiet of night, when she wrote in her journal, she allowed herself one reflection. We do not choose the storms, but we choose who we become in them. And that choice, she knew, was the truest measure of the heart. Some stories end when the plane lands. This one soared far beyond the runway. Dr. Celeste Morgan and her family reminded the world that dignity cannot be denied not by a uniform, not by a gate agent, not by prejudice disguised as procedure. Captain Hayes showed us that gratitude and courage can turn humiliation into justice. And even Samantha Blake, stripped of her authority, was forced to face the mirror of her own actions. It is easy to condemn discrimination in headlines, harder still to recognize it in everyday choices in the tone of a voice, the flick of a hand, the judgment of a glance. Yet this story teaches us that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in grace. A grace that humbles, that heals, that changes hearts. So what will you do the next time you witness unfairness? Will you look away? Or will you stand, as Captain Hayes did, for what is right? If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and keep building a world where respect is never optional, but guaranteed.